Okay, welcome to this edition of Trader Education. Today we're going to be looking at the RSI, Relative Strength Index, as well as the MACD. We are currently looking at the weekly chart for Nucor Corporation. Bear with me here, and I'm going to teach you some good stuff here. Little disclosure, I will admit that this is not the best chart for what I'm about to show you, but nonetheless, it does have good results, and it really does have pretty good entry points despite the chart trading in a decent range here. As you can see from here and here, we're not making huge gains that are running long ways. If you look at Google, Amazon, companies like that, even Facebook, they run continuously up. This trades in a little bit more trading range, and we consistently still get good entries here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you what I know, and I do want everybody to realize that I have studied these things extensively. So bear with me here, and I'll teach you some good stuff. So getting into it, first thing I want you to notice here, we're going to look at the RSI, Relative Strength Index. First thing to note is going to be your time period. The default is going to be 14. This is considered the moving average, I believe. So if you know what moving averages are, you might have a 50-day moving average. Well, here we're doing a 26-day average going with the RSI here. The default is 14. Now, I chose not to go with 14 just because these peaks were a little sloppy. Things weren't lining up as nice. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to switch to a different time frame. So let's say maybe I was like, all right, let's bump it up to 21. Maybe I'll get a little bit better signals here, a little bit cleaner. And you do. Things are a little bit cleaner here. I really felt that 21 gave me the cleanest signals. And why do I say that? There's a little bit of excessive overlap in some of these. And I think I moved this green line down a little bit earlier, so it looks different from when I was looking at it earlier. But nonetheless, I really want them to clearly obey that line. We're getting a little bit of dips and valleys that could create a little bit excessive false entries and exits here. I mean, here ultimately you did want to get out because it did go down, but nonetheless, so I went with 26. That's enough with the that's enough with the time periods. So bear with me here. So first thing, you're like, Brandon, what do you got going on here? You got drawing these lines, you got these boxes. Anytime I draw a box, it represents a signal. And I'm just drawing these boxes to illustrate to you how I'm generating these signals given these lines. So first thing to note, always draw trend lines when you're working with RSI. Number one rule to drawing a trend line, you should always have a minimum of 3 points of contact, a minimum. If it's any 2 points on a peak can form a line. So you have to have 3 lines. I'll draw a little trend line I see right here. That's pretty easy. I mean, look at all of these points of contact right here. I'm a little sloppy there. But yeah, see, it's at least 3 points. It shows a valid, kind of an upward trend. Now, it's not very meaningful or very helpful because, you weren't able to draw that third peak to all the way over here. So make sure when you're drawing peaks that the third peak really has formed and you're still obeying along those trend lines. That's a little bit of rambling, I know, but bear with me. So the very first thing I drew was actually not this trend line, but this trend line. And why? What I'm looking for here is to show RSI resistance. I'm looking for the RSI to show me a trend line, to show me that the market's behaving in such a way. And so you may notice that line, that resistance line down here that I drew is going down, but the price action here was going up. And that's an interesting note, it is. So let's look at that. Peaks correspond like that, right? And like this. This is known as bullish bearish divergence. At least that's what I call it. It's probably bearish divergence, or it's probably I just coined it as bullish bearish divergence. And as you can see, we're making higher highs on lower technicals on both RSI and MACD. Remember, RSI, that's relative strength index. This is showing less strength at a higher price. That's a cause for concern. So look out for that, because that was an early sell indicator. It truly was. And furthermore, if we, so, you couldn't make this trend line to get out of here originally, because you would have only had 2 points there. You couldn't have said that that was a trend line at the time, but you can use it going forward, connect those points with other points. So we got rejected up here. Again, we get rejected right here to the downside, and then we come along here, and that's 3 points of contact. So I'll draw a trend line, and bam, we break out. We break above this trend line right here. That's a buy signal. If we look at the MACD, the moving average convergence divergence, I have it set on default settings. We have we're crossing above the 0 line here, and it looks very nice. A little of an advanced topic for you guys is how I was trained with MACD, and this also applies to RSI, but MACD is showing what is called uniform action right here. Uniform action. That's literally, it looks like a U. It's symmetrical on both sides. It's symmetrical. So what you're seeing over here is basically what you're seeing over here. And we see this uniform action, and we drive prices higher. And look, I mean, you just get such a good entry right there. That's a beautiful entry. And this is on the weekly, so just imagine what the daily would be showing you. On the daily, you definitely could have gotten in a little earlier maybe. So that was a nice little run. That was a good entry. And how do we get that? Simply by looking at the RSI, to complement looking at the MACD to complement our RSI buy indicator. This is a buy indicator right here. I should draw a box. You're right. I'm sorry. So, and you may be saying, now this sounds whack. How are you going to draw those lines and then say that everything's going to obey it? Well, that's why it's always good to, I back tested this strategy on dozens and dozens and dozens of equities, and primarily it works. I will say sometimes this strategy doesn't always work the best on the daily, and when I say that, it's just hard to get these peaks to line up on the daily. You really got to be looking at a pretty small time frame, like something in here, to be able to read the RSI on the daily. Sometimes if you're trying to get like the whole big picture like this, and with daily candlesticks and the RSI, can be a little trickier. But my point being, so I'll switch to it real quick. I don't want to spend much time on this, but it's a little bit more noisy, as you can tell. It's not as clean, not as beautiful. But if you come in on the closer time frame, you can get a picture. I can start connecting these peaks right here, things like that, and I could even say, this peak lines up with all those. So let's go back to the weekly though, and let me finish up what I was talking about here. I just wanted you guys to be aware of time frames and sloppiness of the chart. But let me get into this real quick. I do apologize if I'm going a little slow for you. I'm going to draw another trend line, and this time I'm going to connect these peaks. Now, before we even got the original buy signal, you got a nice buy signal right here, and that got you in for this entire move instead of just getting rejected right here. Obviously I said earlier, at this point in time, when it was, on 2008, you didn't know that I was going to get rejected right here, because you didn't know that this was a resistance line at the time, but you knew that you did have a buying signal to get into this huge run here, and that MACD confirmed it. And you saw that I wrote up here that MACD crosses above 0 or more significance. Always remember that. Always remember that. If you get a MACD cross above, like at the 0 line, it is a very it's a much more significant signal. We have a cross near the 0 line, it gets you in for this action. You have a cross near the 0 line, it gets you in for this massive run here. So again, I use the MACD crossing right here, the RSI breaking of that trend line, and literally we get the entire run in. So it's a very significant signal, and I do think that this truly does hold weight. Another thing is, look at what we're breaking at here. This is very interesting if you ask me. So where we broke right here, I said you had a buy signal here, right? Well, whenever I break an RSI trend line, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna put a ray down, a ray right where that that RSI broke that resistance line. That's why we're seeing this green line right here. And the idea is that green line is now going to act like support and resistance for a period of time, a pivot point, if you will, or a swing point. And it's exactly what it does. And if you look at it, you get a break below it right here, and that corresponds to this day right here. And you get a miss out on this whole downswing, so when you get another buy signal, you have more cash on hand and you can go in bigger and have a better risk tolerance going forward. I mean, we even see continuation pattern here, so it's a little sloppy around here, I know, but that's why you have the RSI to confirm, the MACD to confirm down here. We're kind of hugging that line right there, going above, below, above, below. It kind of does piggyback actually off the idea of uniform action going on there. We are seeing symmetrical triangle type crosses here, showing that line is more significant, or showing the significance of that line, because it literally is swinging around here. And it's swinging around there and we see a continuation pattern here. This is a wedge of some sort, if you want to call it that, or for the traders that know what a continuation pattern is, I think you would agree. And we do break above this continuation pattern here, so that's a buy signal on the price action, and we get a nice pop in the MACD here, and our RSI is trading above this resistance line. This is a good signal. And again, we come back, we test this line, we bounce off, test this line, we bounce off. You see what I'm talking about here? Even here, we come down, we test this line, we bounce off a little bit, and we're hugging it a little bit more, showing a little bit more weakness here on the RSI, I will admit. And we finally do break down around this area right here. And you stay out of the market until we cross above this line with the MACD confirming, and bing bada boom, you get this major run in. And it's a good signal. It really is. Now you can see, I will make a point real quick before I start talking about this. I had mentioned earlier, if you have a trend line break, put a ray down where it broke at, and look, both of those rays match up, just going back to the significance of that price point. Now you'll see that it is on the 50 there. It is on the 50. RSI crosses above 50 in general are significant, I will admit that. But sometimes you see that whatever chart it is, if 50 is not the most significant, maybe it's 55, or maybe it's 45, or maybe even 35. Some of them have their little mid swing points. These swing points that we're seeing in through here, it's supposed to be around 50. A lot of them, maybe around high 50s to lower 40s. So this is just a way to identify that swing point, those points where when it goes below those lines, it's bad news bears type of thing. So I mean, look at this. This gave you a sell signal right here on the weekly chart. On the weekly chart, if you had this on the daily chart, you definitely could have avoided all of this just by looking at the RSI. You don't even need to know what the news is, because the RSI is telling you the second it happens as well. So that's kind of the idea behind all this. The idea that there is symmetry in the universe. And you can say, Brandon, you're full of shit, but I mean, look, man, you're getting a decent amount of buy signals here, and if you use several things to help you, you'll do well. And it does take studying, it does take practice. So if you want to learn this, what I encourage you to do is get an account on tradingview.com. Just open it up. If you have a Google Gmail account, just sign in with that, or a Twitter account, sign in with that, and get moving. Post some charts, make some charts. And so when you're making these, if you want to do what I'm doing, just come here, go to indicators, type in RSI, and put in the relative strength index. Go to MACD, put that in, and it'll put them below the chart. And get away, start charting. You come over here and you can pull out a trend line array. These are trend lines, these would be rays, and then you can come here and you can get a rectangle or a brush, and you can start doing things like that. So I do encourage this. I do encourage you to practice. Remember, when you're practicing, draw your trend lines. Your trend lines require at least 3 points of contact. do not bias yourself with two-pointed contact, with trend lines with only 2 points of contact. You're biasing yourself. You want to make sure that you're holding yourself accountable. Avoid being biased here, and you'll do well. So I hope this video was helpful, and I think that I'll definitely follow up with this video some more, because I do stuff like this all the time. So if you want to look at some of my published charts, you can go to my page on TradingView, and I'll go ahead and post that in the description. But it's GUM BTG, and you can look at a lot of these. And just to show you, if I do have any credibility, if you look here, some of the top people on TradingView are agreeing with my ideas here. I mean, this guy's on the home page. I'll even show you here. He's number 2 in the world. Number 2 in the world, and he's liking my ideas, and that's not the first time. I mean, that guy actually follows me. He only follows like 200 people, and I'm one of them. So say what you will there. I do think that words and likes speak. So Tom Hall's regularly at number 1. He's not listed today. He'll go to the week. He's probably on there. Yeah, Tom Hall is agreeing with my idea. Look at that. So there you go, everybody. I hope this was helpful. I hope that I have a little bit of credibility, and best of luck to everyone.